The flashlight hit him square in the face before he even finished rolling down the window. Officer Kyle Peterson leaned in close enough that Marcus could smell the coffee on his breath, and looked him up and down the way a man looks at something he's already decided doesn't matter. Then Peterson reached through the window, snatched the military ID card from Marcus's breast pocket, and dropped it, deliberately, into the puddle of rainwater collecting along the curb. "I don't care what that card says," Peterson said. "You're just another black man who doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut." Dunmore arrived 30 seconds later, looked Marcus over once, smiled the way men smile when they believe they have all the power in the world. "Book him," he said. "Disrespecting an officer. These Eastwick boys never learn, do they?" And then, as the cold metal cuffs snapped around Marcus's wrists, too tight, drawing blood, Peterson leaned down to his ear and said the third thing, the quiet thing, the thing said only for Marcus to hear. 4 stars. A soft laugh. "Sure, buddy. And I'm the president. Now sit down like a good boy." Marcus said nothing. He had learned over 31 years of service that some battles are not fought with words. His were fought with evidence, and he had been collecting it for a very long time. Don't go anywhere. This story goes somewhere nobody standing in that parking lot could have imagined. Drop your city and local time in the comments right now. I want to know where in the world you're watching this. And if stories like this matter to you, hit subscribe. We're just getting started. 36 hours before that flashlight found his face, General Marcus D. Calloway stepped off a regional flight at Millhaven Airport, carrying a single carry-on bag and the kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with travel. He was not in uniform. He had not been in uniform since he landed. That was intentional. The man who walked through the terminal looked like any other traveler passing through a mid-sized southern city on a Tuesday evening. Dark jacket, plain trousers, a face that gave nothing away. No insignia. No aide-de-camp walking 2 steps behind him. No car from the base waiting at the curb. Just a rental, a modest gray sedan, and a drive through streets he had not seen in 14 months. I knew every turn by memory. Marcus Calloway had grown up in Eastwick. He had learned to ride a bicycle on Clement Street. He had sat on the front porch of his father's house every summer evening until he was 17 years old, watching the neighborhood breathe around him, the old men playing cards under the oak trees, the women calling children in for dinner, the smell of someone's grill 2 houses down mixing with the night air. He had carried all of it with him through 31 years of service, through deployments, through promotions, through rooms where he was the only black man at the table, and through rooms where that fact was never once acknowledged. Eastwick had made him, and now quietly someone was trying to unmake Eastwick. He saw it the moment he turned off the highway. The neighborhood looked the same at first glance. The old trees still stood. The front porches were still there. The black-owned barbershop on the corner of Clement and Fifth still had its hand-painted sign. But there were other signs now. Larger ones. Development notices posted on telephone poles. A block of houses on Morrison Avenue. Standing empty windows, dark grass overgrown. A banner stretched across the old community center parking lot, Crestwood South, Phase 1, coming spring. He parked in front of his father's house and sat in the car for a moment. The light was on in the front room. It was always on. James Calloway Sr. answered the door before Marcus reached the top porch step. 79 years old, a retired school teacher, a man who had taught 4th grade in Eastwick for 34 years and known the name of every child who had ever sat in his classroom. I was smaller than Marcus remembered. Or maybe Marcus had simply stopped expecting his father to shrink. They embraced at the door without ceremony. That was their way. Inside over coffee at the kitchen table. The story came out slowly. 3 weeks earlier, 2 officers had knocked on James's door at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday. A wellness check, they said a neighbor had reportedly called in a concern. James had answered the door calmly, as he answered everything. He had asked for the caller's name, as was his right. One of the officers, young, impatient, had grabbed his wrist when he reached back inside for his reading glasses, claiming a sudden movement. James had been pushed against the doorframe. His wrist had been wrenched. No charges filed. No report written. No apology given. Marcus looked at his father's wrist across the kitchen table. The bruise had faded to yellow at the edges. It had been 3 weeks. "Did you file a complaint?" Marcus asked. "I filed it the next morning," his father said. "Online form. They gave me a case number." He paused. "Haven't heard anything since." Marcus nodded slowly. He already knew that. He had known it before he landed. What he had not known, what no report or satellite data could have told him, was the look in his father's eyes. The particular quality of stillness that settles into a man when he has decided quietly and without drama that he is no longer safe in his own home. That look was new. Marcus had never seen it on his father's face before. That night, after his father had gone to bed, Marcus made a phone call from the back porch. The number was not saved in any civilian directory. "Operations Center," answered a crisp voice. "Authorization Callaway Sierra 041, Marcus said quietly. "I need the full monitoring package active. Personal operation, no rank designation, no uniform. Field protocol standard." A brief pause. "Confirmed, General. Package active as of 2200 hours. Anything else?" "The Millhaven checkpoint data. Send it to my secure line." "Already transmitted, sir. The pattern goes back 18 months. Marcus ended the call and stood in the dark for a while, looking out at the backyard. The same yard where he had learned to throw a baseball. The same oak tree his father had never cut down, despite the city's repeated requests. Everything the same. Everything quietly under threat. The next evening was ordinary by design. His father needed medication, a refill from the pharmacy on Garfield Avenue 3 miles away. Marcus offered to go. Simple errand. 20-minute round trip. Before he left, he stopped at a small coffee shop 2 blocks from the house. The kind of place that had been in Eastwick for decades, wood-paneled walls, and a handwritten menu on a chalkboard. A young woman behind the counter, college-age, bright eyes, clearly working. A double shift took his order. Black coffee, no sugar. She handed him the cup with a tired smile. He took a sip at the door. It was sweet. 2 sugars at least. He glanced back. She was already helping the next customer, completely unaware. Marcus looked at the cup for a moment, then walked to his car and drove toward the pharmacy. It was a small, meaningless thing. The kind of thing that gets forgotten in the ordinary current of a day. He would remember everything else about that evening for the rest of his life. The drive toward Garfield Avenue took him through the intersection of Clement and Harborview Boulevard, the boundary where Eastwick ended and Crestwood Pines began. He had driven it 100 times. He knew the exact moment. The streetlights got brighter, the roads got smoother, the houses got larger. He also knew, before he saw the blue lights, what was waiting at that boundary tonight. The checkpoint materialized out of the rain, like something that had always been there. Marcus slowed, rolled his window down, kept both hands visible on the wheel. And Officer Kyle Peterson stepped out of the dark with a flashlight and a look that had already made its decision. License and registration. No greeting. No explanation. The flashlight beam swept across Marcus's face and held there, deliberate, the way you hold a light on something you want to make uncomfortable. Marcus reached slowly for the glove compartment, movements unhurried and visible. He had been trained to move this way in hostile territory. It occurred to him not for the first time that the training had always had a second application closer to home. He handed over his driver's license. Eastwick address. Plain and clear. May I ask the purpose of this checkpoint, officer? Peterson studied the license. His flashlight drifted to the back seat, the floor of the passenger window. Routine area check. He said it the way men say things they have rehearsed so many times the words have lost all meaning. I see. Marcus kept his voice level. I'm on my way to the pharmacy on Garfield. My father needs his medication. Peterson didn't respond to that. Instead, he keyed his radio. Got an Eastwick resident here at checkpoint 4. Running it. He paused, then added slowly with just enough weight on the words, Eastwick resident. Marcus watched through the rain-blurred rear window. 2 cars ahead of him in the adjacent lane, both with Crestwood Pines plates, both white drivers, were waved through with nothing more than a glance. No license check. No flashlight sweep. A casual hand signal, and they were gone. He filed that away. He had been filing things away since he turned onto Harborview Boulevard. Peterson returned to the window. Behind him, a second officer, older, heavier, moving with the deliberate slowness of a man who wanted you to know he was in no hurry, approached from the command vehicle. Lieutenant Craig Dunmore. Marcus read the nameplate, the badge number, the rank insignia in the first 3 seconds. Dunmore looked Marcus over, the way a man looks at a piece of furniture he is considering whether to move or simply discard. Then he looked at the Eastwick address on the license in Peterson's hand, and something in his expression settled into a familiar arrangement. Step out fully, sir, Dunmore said. The sir was architectural. It held the shape of courtesy with nothing inside it. We're conducting enhanced vehicle inspections in this corridor tonight. May I ask what enhanced inspections are based on, Lieutenant? My license is valid, and I've committed no moving violation. Dunmore's chin came up slightly. We decide what the basis is out here. With respect, Lieutenant Terry v. Ohio requires reasonable, articulable suspicion of criminal activity. Delaware v. Prowse establishes that random stops without suspicion are unconstitutional. I'd like to know your suspicion before I step out. A beat of silence. Then Peterson half a step closer now. Listen to this. Got a black man quoting case law at a checkpoint, like he's at a law school seminar. He said it lightly, conversationally, as if it were an observation about the weather. Eastwick's getting real educated these days, huh, Lieutenant? Dunmore didn't smile. He just watched Marcus with the patience of a man who has never once been held accountable for anything he has done on a Tuesday night. Last opportunity, Dunmore said. Step out and consent to inspection, or we escalate. Marcus stepped out. Movements, slow hands, visible nothing that could be called resistance by any honest witness. On the sidewalk, 15 feet away, Mrs. Loretta Briggs, 67 years old, returning from her evening walk, a woman who had known Marcus since he was 8, stopped and looked. Then she reached into her coat pocket for her phone. Peterson noticed immediately. He moved toward her. Ma'am, no recording at an active checkpoint. Put that away. Mrs. Briggs held her ground for one long moment. Then she put the phone in her pocket, but her hand stayed there, and Marcus registered the angle of her wrist. She was still recording. Good. I decline consent to search my vehicle without probable cause, Marcus said clearly. He pressed 2 fingers lightly against the face of his watch, a gesture that looked like nothing. I am formally requesting a supervisor. I am the supervisor, Dunmore said. Then I am formally requesting his supervisor. Something shifted in Dunmore's face. Not anger, something colder than anger. He nodded once to Peterson. Peterson moved to the car door and reached inside, and his hand found the pharmacy bag on the passenger seat. He held it up. examined it. The prescription label was clearly visible. James Calloway Sr., metoprolol succinate, 50 milliliters. Dr. Patricia Osei, Eastwick Family Medical. Contraband check, Peterson said, and upended the bag. The pill bottles hit the wet road. One rolled under the car. Several tablets scattered across the asphalt, disappearing into the rain-dark surface. Marcus went very still. He crouched down slowly, hands still visible, movements still deliberate, military bearing intact, and began picking up the medication one piece at a time. His father's heart medication. Gathering it from a wet road in the rain, while two officers watched and said nothing. Dunmore watched this without expression. He did not tell Peterson to help. He did not tell Peterson to stop. He simply watched, and that watching was its own kind of statement. Marcus stood up. The pill bottles were recovered. Some tablets were gone, dissolved into the puddles, lost in the dark. His father would be short on medication tonight because of what had just happened on this road. He said nothing about it. He filed it away. "Cuff him," Dunmore said. "Obstruction of a lawful checkpoint inspection." Peterson grabbed Marcus's arm. "Stop resisting," though Marcus had not moved an inch. "I am complying under protest," Marcus said clearly and steadily for the recording device in his watch. "Officer Peterson, badge 2291. This grip is excessive and constitutes unnecessary force." Peterson wrenched his arm higher. Pain shot through the shoulder. Marcus did not make a sound. Then Peterson reached into Marcus's breast pocket, pulled out the military ID, and let it fall slowly, with full intention, into the puddle at the curb. "Don't need this where you're going," he said, and as the cold metal cuffs locked around Marcus's wrists, too tight, biting into skin, drawing the first thin line of blood, Peterson leaned close and said the last thing. The quiet thing. Said only for Marcus, meant only to diminish. 4 stars. A soft, contemptuous laugh. "Sure, buddy. And I'm the president. Now sit down like a good boy." Marcus said nothing. He looked at the ID face down in the puddle for exactly 1 second. Then he got into the back of the cruiser, sat straight, and began mentally reviewing the Pentagon protocol he had activated 40 minutes ago. Millhaven Police Department smelled the same way every municipal building smells after midnight. Burnt coffee floor wax applied too long ago, and the particular staleness of a space where bad things happen slowly and without ceremony. Marcus was walked through the back entrance. That was deliberate. The front entrance had a waiting area with civilians. A desk sergeant visible from the street. A level of visibility that nobody who had just arrested a man for requesting a supervisor wanted right now. The booking room was fluorescent and featureless. A counter. A camera on a tripod. A fingerprint scanner with a cracked housing. A young booking officer, mid-20s, name tag reading D. Colby, who looked up when Marcus was brought in, looked back down at his screen, and began typing with the expression of a man who had learned that the less he saw, the simpler his nights remained. Name: Marcus Darnell Calloway. Address: Marcus gave the Eastwick address. Colby's typing slowed almost imperceptibly, but Marcus caught it. The officer typed the address, read it back to himself, and for just a fraction of a second, his eyes moved to Marcus with something in them that might have been curiosity or discomfort, or simply recognition of a pattern he had seen too many times on this shift. He looked back at his screen without saying anything. Behind, Marcus, Peterson and Dunmore had drifted toward the far end of the room, near the water cooler, near enough to the processing area that their voices carried without them having to raise them. That was also deliberate. Another Eastwick resident thinking, "The checkpoint doesn't apply to him," Peterson said. He filled a paper cup with water unhurried. Dunmore leaned against the wall. "The program's working. You can tell because they're getting more resistant. Means they're feeling it." This one quoted case law at me, Terry v. Ohio. Peterson's voice carried the particular amusement of a man performing for an audience. Like that's going to help him. It never does, Dunmore said. Marcus stood at the booking counter and memorized every word, every inflection, every pause. His watch was still running. The mugshot was taken without instruction. The camera clicked, and Colby moved to the fingerprint scanner without looking up. Marcus pressed his thumb against the glass. Black ink spread across the pad. He watched his own fingerprint appear on the screen and thought about his father sitting in the front room on Clement Street, the lamp on waiting. Personal effects, Colby said. Peterson emptied Marcus's pockets onto the counter. Keys, phone, wallet. The recovered pharmacy bag now taped shut and labeled as evidence. And from Marcus's jacket's inner pocket, a small folded square of paper that Peterson unfolded with one hand glanced at and set on the counter. It was a pencil drawing. Small, careful, the lines unsteady in the way a child's lines are unsteady, full of effort and intention. A figure in a uniform with stars on the shoulders. Beside the figure, printed in block letters that had been gone over twice to make them darker. Grandpa says you protect everyone. Marcus's granddaughter. 7 years old. She had pressed it into his jacket pocket the morning he left, standing on her toes to reach. Peterson looked at it for 2 seconds. Then he picked it up between 2 fingers crossed to the evidence bin and dropped it in with the rest. Evidence, he said. The word was flat, bureaucratic, delivered without a flicker of anything that could be called human recognition. Colby's hands stopped on his keyboard for exactly 1 beat. Then he resumed typing. Marcus said nothing. He stood at the counter with his hands at his sides and filed that away with everything else, and the filing of it cost him something that he would not account for until much later, in a quieter moment when the work was done. Phone call, Colby said. 1 call. He pointed to the wall phone. Marcus crossed to it and dialed from memory. Not his attorney. Not his aide de camp. A number that existed in no civilian directory and rang in a room that was operational 24 hours a day, regardless of what was happening anywhere else in the world. Operations Center. Authorization Callaway Sierra 041. Marcus said, his voice low and completely even. Initiating field protocol. Location transmitting. Confirm package active. A pause of perhaps 2 seconds. Confirmed general. Package active. Response window from your mark 47 minutes. Marcus said. He hung up and returned to the booking counter. Deputy Commissioner Sandra Voss arrived 11 minutes later. Marcus heard her before he saw her heels on the corridor floor, the particular cadence of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around her arrival. She appeared in the doorway of the booking room in a fitted blazer, city council identification badge on a lanyard, hair immaculate. At Marcus checked the clock, 9:31 p.m. She looked through the interior window at Marcus with the assessing transactional gaze of a woman who had spent 20 years in municipal politics and had learned to calculate the cost of every situation before she committed to a response. Dunmore, she said, without moving her eyes from Marcus. Is this the one who gave Peterson trouble at checkpoint 4? Yes, ma'am. Obstruction, disrespect, failure to comply with lawful checkpoint procedures. Good. She studied Marcus a moment longer. The development timeline has dependencies, Craig. Eastwick residents need to understand that this corridor has new operating standards. Every incident that gets processed cleanly sends a message. Understood. She moved away from the window. Her heels receded down the corridor. Marcus was escorted to a holding cell at the end of the block. The door was solid metal, no window. It closed with the sound of a thing that has been closing the same way for 30 years. He sat on the metal bench, back straight, breathing measured. The small damp cell smelled of industrial cleaner and old concrete. The clock on the wall of the corridor, visible through the cell door's narrow slot, read 9:43 p.m. He did not reach for the phone in his mind. He did not reach for comfort or reassurance or the rehearsal of outcomes. He sat in the particular stillness that 31 years of command had built in him. The stillness that is not passivity, but its precise opposite, and he waited. His phone, sitting in the evidence tray 40 feet away, began to vibrate. Then again, then again. He could not see the screen. He did not need to. He already knew who was calling. The interrogation room at Millhaven Police Department was designed to make a person feel small. Not through any dramatic feature, no blinding spotlight, no two-way mirror, straight out of a television procedural. Just a bolted table, 2 chairs, 1 overhead bulb that hummed at a frequency slightly too high to ignore, and walls the color of old teeth. The room was perhaps 9 feet by 11. Marcus had slept in smaller spaces in 3 different combat zones, and found them preferable to this. Dunmore entered at 10:08 p.m., carrying a thin manila folder and Marcus's confiscated belongings in a clear plastic bag. He set the bag on the table without ceremony. He pulled out the chair across from Marcus and sat down with the unhurried confidence of a man who believed completely and without doubt that he controlled this room. "Comfortable," he said. Marcus said nothing. Dunmore opened the folder, scanned it as though reading something interesting. Though Marcus noted his eyes moved too quickly across the page for any real reading to occur. Performance. All of it performance. Marcus Darnell Calloway. Eastwick address. No priors. Dunmore looked up. "First time learning how checkpoint compliance works, I guess." "I'd like my attorney present," Marcus said. "You'll get a call when the booking process is complete. I invoked my right to counsel at the checkpoint. I'm invoking it again now. This interview should not be proceeding." Dunmore leaned back in his chair. "We're just having a conversation." "Then I'm ending the conversation. I'd like my attorney." Dunmore studied him for a moment, with the expression of a man recalibrating. He had expected Marcus understood one of 2 responses, either the brittle anger of a man who felt wrongly accused and could be provoked into saying something usable, or the frightened compliance of a man who wanted to go home and would sign whatever was put in front of him. He had not expected this. The absolute, unhurried refusal to perform either role. Dunmore reached into the plastic bag and removed Marcus's wallet. Opened it. Went through it slowly and deliberately, not searching for anything specific Marcus understood, but demonstrating ownership. Credit cards. A folded receipt. A photograph of James Calloway Sr. taken at last Thanksgiving, his father smiling at a table full of food. Dunmore looked at the photograph without expression and set it face down on the table. Then he found the military ID. He held it up to the overhead light, examined it with the performative skepticism of a man who has already decided what he thinks. "Victoria Taylor," he said, then caught himself reading the actual name. Marcus Calloway, General United States Army, 4 stars. He set the ID on the table and smiled. "That's ambitious." "That identification is authentic," Marcus said. "Sure it is." Dunmore slid a single sheet of paper across the table. A plea form. Misdemeanor disorderly conduct. A line for a signature at the bottom. "Sign this. You're out by 6 a.m. Go back to Eastwick. Everybody moves on." Marcus looked at the form without touching it. "I'll need my attorney present before I sign anything." Dunmore nodded slowly, as though this were the answer he had been expecting and had already prepared for. He stood moved behind Marcus's chair and placed both hands on the back of it, a gesture that shifted the room's geometry, putting Dunmore above and behind, pressing the edges of the space inward. From the corridor outside through walls, thin enough to carry voices, Marcus heard Sandra Voss. Her tone had dropped to the register she used when she was giving instructions she did not want attributed to herself later. Sheriff Whitmore wants this wrapped tonight, Craig. Clean processing. No loose ends. Dunmore's voice quieter. He's not cooperating. Then stop asking nicely. A pause. Then, he has a military ID. Could be a problem. Voss without hesitation. It's a fake. Process him on that too. Impersonation of a military officer. Add it to the sheet. Marcus filed every word. His watch continued its quiet work. Dunmore returned. He picked up Marcus's military ID from the table, walked to the far side of the room, and set it down on the floor beside the wall. Then he stepped on it slowly. As he walked back around to his side of the table, the laminate cracked audibly. He sat back down and looked across the table at Marcus as though nothing had happened. "You people from Eastwick," Dunmore said, and the casual intimacy of the phrase "you people" was more deliberate than a shout would have been. "You come to a checkpoint. You get asked reasonable questions, and instead of just complying like a normal person, you want to make a production. Quote case law. Make it complicated." He folded his hands on the table. "You know what that tells me? That tells me somebody's hiding something." Marcus looked at him steadily. "I was driving to a pharmacy to get my father's heart medication. At 9 o'clock at night. The pharmacy closes at 10. Right." Dunmore's expression said he found this entirely unconvincing. Peterson entered without knocking and moved behind Marcus's chair. His hands came down on Marcus's shoulders, heavy, pressing the weight of them, calibrated to just below what could be formally documented as assault. It was a gesture Marcus had seen applied to other people in other rooms, and seeing it from this side of the table clarified several things simultaneously. His phone, sitting in the evidence tray in the booking room, 40 feet and one locked door away, had been vibrating at intervals since 9:50 p.m. 7 calls. All from the same number saved as Dad. Home. His father was sitting on Clement Street right now, lamp on phone in hand, calling a number that was ringing in an evidence tray nobody was going to answer. Not knowing where his son was. Not knowing why he hadn't come home. Sitting with a heart condition and a wrist that still hadn't fully healed, calling into silence. Dunmore slid the plea form 2 inches closer across the table. "Last time," he said. "Sign it." The door opened without a knock. Detective Raymond Okafor stood in the frame, expression professionally neutral, eyes taking in the room, with the quick, calibrated assessment of a man who has walked into situations like this before and has learned to read them very fast. He looked at Peterson's hands on Marcus's shoulders. He looked at the cracked military ID on the floor. He looked at the plea form on the table. Then he looked at Dunmore. "Lieutenant," he said carefully, "a moment outside." The hallway outside the interrogation room was narrow and badly lit, one of those institutional corridors that exists purely as connective tissue between rooms where things actually happen. Dunmore followed Okafor into it, with the reluctant compliance of a man who outranked the person asking, but recognized dimly that something required his attention. Okafor held the military ID under the hallway's overhead light. He did not speak immediately. He turned the card slowly, examining each edge, each surface with the methodical attention of someone who knows precisely what he is looking for. The holographic seal, the micro-engraved serial number along the bottom edge, the UV reactive thread embedded in the laminate that was only visible under certain light conditions, the specific weight and texture of official Department of Defense identification stock. Okafor had spent 4 years in Army Reserve Intelligence, before joining the Millhaven PD. He had processed enough military credentials in that time to know the difference between genuine and counterfeit at a glance. This was not a glance situation. This required the hallway light and 30 seconds of careful attention. He got what he needed in 20. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "this is real." Dunmore's expression didn't change. "He stole it. The micro-engraving matches the holographic serial. You can't replicate that outside of a DoD facility. The UV thread is intact." Okafor turned the card over. "This was issued by the Department of Defense. It has not been altered." "Then he stole it from someone who had it issued." Okafor looked at Dunmore for a moment. "Sir, 4 stars is the highest rank in the United States Army. There are 7 active 4-star generals in the entire U.S. military right now. 7. He held the ID up once more. "This man may be one of them." Dunmore's jaw tightened. The calculation behind his eyes was visible, the rapid, pragmatic arithmetic of a man weighing exposure against momentum. He had come too far into this evening to reverse cleanly. The arrest was on record. The charges were filed. Voss had given instructions. Whitmore wanted it wrapped. "Process him," Dunmore said. "We'll let the DA sort out the ID question." "Sir, if we've detained an active 4-star general without proper procedure, no attorney present after invocation, continued questioning after rights were invoked, physical handling during arrest." "I said, process him, detective." Okafor held his ground. Not loudly, not dramatically, simply did not move. Department Protocol Section 12 requires identity verification for any individual presenting federal credentials before processing can continue. I'm asking for 20 minutes to make one phone call. The silence between them lasted several seconds. "You transferred here 6 months ago," Dunmore said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir." "From Riverdale District." "Correct. Riverdale's a long way from here. Nice district. Good assignment." Dunmore let that sit for a moment. "A lot easier posting than Millhaven Central, I'd imagine." Okafor understood the offer being made. He had understood it the moment he walked into the interrogation room and saw Peterson's hands on a handcuffed man's shoulders and a military ID cracked on the floor. He had been understanding offers like this for 4 months. Offers delivered through tone rather than language, through implication rather than instruction. He had been filing paperwork that disappeared. He had been having conversations that were never followed up. He had been watching checkpoint arrest logs and cross-referencing them against demographic data at his own kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night, because the official system had no mechanism for the kind of documentation he was attempting. "I'll make the call from my desk," Okafor said. 20 minutes. Dunmore said nothing. He turned and went back into the interrogation room. Okafor made the call from his desk phone, not his cell, which he understood was subject to review. He dialed the number for the Pentagon's public affairs duty officer, identified himself, provided his badge number, and read the name and ID number from the card. The duty officer put him on hold for 90 seconds. When she came back, her voice had changed. "Detective Okafor, I need you to confirm your location and the current status of the individual in question." Okafor confirmed both. Another pause. Longer this time. "Please remain at your current location. Do not allow that individual to be transferred or further processed. Someone will be in contact with your station within the hour." The line went quiet in a way that was different from being placed on hold. It was the quiet of a call that had just been escalated to a room Okafor did not have clearance to know about. He set the phone down and sat for a moment. Then he collected what he needed from his bottom desk drawer, a USB drive, a folder of printed documents, 4 months of careful work, and walked back toward the interrogation room. Deputy Commissioner Voss intercepted him in the corridor. "Detective." Her tone was the particular temperature of authority that expected immediate deference. "You're needed in the dispatch room. We have a backlog from the checkpoint operation." "Yes, ma'am. I'll be there shortly." "Now, Detective." Okafor met her eyes. "Ma'am, I have a procedural matter to address with the individual in interrogation 2. Section 12 verification. It'll take 10 minutes. Voss studied him. The calculation in her expression was identical in character to Dunmore's, the same arithmetic, the same weighing. Okafor had seen that look in this building more times than he could count. He had learned to hold eye contact through it without blinking. "Your transfer papers to Riverside District," Voss said quietly, "are already drafted. I haven't signed them yet." "I understand, ma'am." "Don't misunderstand me, Raymond." The use of his first name was precisely calibrated. "I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you of a document that exists. What happens to it depends on the choices you make in the next few minutes." Okafor looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at the USB drive in his hand. 4 months. 47 complaint forms. Checkpoint logs. Arrest demographics. Internal communications obtained through channels that Dunmore and Voss did not know he had access to. He looked back up. "I'll be in interrogation 2, ma'am," he said. "Section 12 verification." He walked past her. Behind him, the station's front desk phone began to ring. Then a second line. Then, after a pause that felt significant, a third. The booking sergeant's voice carried down the corridor, strained and uncertain in a way Marcus had not heard from him all evening. "Lieutenant Dunmore, sir, the calls. They're coming in from Washington." The parking lot of Millhaven Police Department was not a large space. 6 rows of marked vehicles, a handicapped bay near the entrance. A dumpster enclosure along the east wall that nobody had painted in 15 years. At 10:26 p.m. on a Tuesday, it held the night shift's personal cars and 2 cruisers waiting for the next rotation. At 10:27 p.m., the first black SUV pulled in. Then the second. Then the third. They came without sirens, without emergency lights, without any of the theatrical apparatus that announces itself as power. They simply arrived, and their arrival was a different kind of statement, the kind made by people who do not need to announce themselves, because the announcement is inherent in the thing itself. The booking sergeant was the first person in the building to see them. He stood at the front desk window for a moment, watching the vehicles park with the practiced geometric precision of a military convoy. And then he picked up the internal line and called the back corridor. Inside interrogation 2, Dunmore's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Read something. His expression did not collapse. It was not that dramatic, but something in it changed. The way a wall changes when the first crack appears. Still a wall, but different. He left the room without a word to Marcus. Marcus sat at the bolted table and waited. He could hear it through the walls now, the shift in the building's ambient sound, the way voices multiplied and changed register when a situation outgrew its original container. Footsteps that moved with purpose rather than routine. The specific quality of institutional silence that descends when people who have been operating with impunity realize, simultaneously and without anyone saying it directly, that the impunity has ended. The door opened. Colonel Denise Hargrove entered in full dress uniform. Silver oak leaf clusters. Service ribbons across her left breast that represented, among other things, 2 combat deployments, a Joint Chief's commendation, and 22 years of distinguished service. She was 51 years old, 5 feet 7 inches, and she entered the room with the particular quality of presence that is not performed and cannot be learned, only built over decades through the accumulation of every moment you held the line when it would have been easier not to. She looked at Marcus. at the indentations on his wrists where the cuffs had been, at the cracked military ID still on the floor where Dunmore had left it. She crossed the room, bent down, and picked up the ID. Set it on the table in front of Marcus. With both hands, carefully, the way you return something that should never have been taken. Then she came to attention and saluted. Marcus returned it from his chair. "General Calloway," she said. "I apologize for the response time." 44 minutes from Marktown, Marcus said. "Within protocol, Colonel." "Yes, sir." Hargrove turned to the two MPs who had entered behind her and now stood at the door. "Remove the restraints." There were no restraints currently on Marcus. Okafor had quietly unlocked them 6 minutes earlier before the SUVs arrived, using a key he had taken from the booking desk on his way back from his phone call. Hargrove registered this, looked at Okafor, and gave him a single nod that contained more acknowledgement than most formal commendations. Dunmore had re-entered the room behind Hargrove. He stood near the door with the uncertain posture of a man who had walked into a situation that had reorganized itself entirely around him without consulting him. "I'm Colonel Denise Hargrove, Pentagon Investigative Command," she said, addressing the room. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be. "This station and its operations are now subject to a federal investigation. No personnel are to leave the building without my authorization. No records are to be accessed, transferred, or deleted. These instructions carry the authority of the Secretary of Defense. Your cooperation is not optional." Sheriff Dale Whitmore arrived 40 seconds later, moving through the corridor with the momentum of an elected official accustomed to being the final word on everything that happened in his county. He was broad-shouldered, red-faced from the cold, and from the 3 phone calls he had apparently received in the last 10 minutes, and he entered the room with his mouth already open. He stopped. Hargrove did not turn around immediately. She finished the instruction she was giving to one of her MPs, made a notation on the tablet she was carrying, and then turned to face him. "Sheriff Whitmore," she said, "please take a seat." The instruction was delivered without any particular emphasis. It did not need emphasis. It was simply the most authoritative sentence spoken in this building in recent memory, and Whitmore understood that as clearly as everyone else in the room, and he sat down. Marcus stood. He straightened his jacket. He rolled his wrists once slowly, and the indentations from the cuffs caught the light. He crossed to where Okafor stood near the wall and extended his hand. Okafor shook it. 4 months of documentation, Marcus said quietly. On your own, inside a system that was actively working against you. "I kept hitting walls," Okafor said. "I know. That's why I'm here." Marcus looked at the USB drive still in Okafor's hand. "That goes into evidence tonight. Everything you have. It's ready." Voss appeared in the doorway. Her political composure was intact in the way a facade is intact. The structure still standing, but something essential behind it, had already given way. She looked at Hargrove. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the MPs stationed at every exit she could see from the doorway. "General," she said, and the title came out of her mouth with visible difficulty, as though she were speaking a language she had only just been informed was fluent around her. "I'm certain we can address whatever concerns Ms. Voss," Marcus said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "I'd like to show you something." He moved to the conference room door that Hargrove's team had already prepared. He gestured for her to enter. She did, and behind her came Dunmore and Whitmore and Peterson, each one guided by the quiet, inexorable current of what was happening, and the door closed behind them all. Hargrove's team activated the first display screen. The checkpoint map appeared. Every location marked in red. every single one positioned at the same boundary, the line between Eastwick and Crestwood Pines, like a wall that had been built without bricks. 6 months of data, Marcus said. Let's begin. The conference room at Millhaven Police Department had never been used for anything more consequential than shift briefings and occasional union grievance meetings. It had a whiteboard with old marker stains, a rectangular table that seated 12 uncomfortably, and a projection screen that had been broken on one side for 8 months without anyone filing a maintenance request. Hargrove's team had transformed it in 19 minutes. 3 display screens now covered the whiteboard. A portable server unit hummed quietly in the corner. 2 federal technicians worked at laptops along the side wall, their faces lit blue-white in the darkened room. Evidence logs were already printing from a portable unit near the door, each page time-stamped, each page carrying the seal of the Pentagon Investigative Command. Marcus stood at the head of the table. Whitmore sat at the far end, arms crossed, the posture of a man who had decided that physical stillness could substitute for the authority he no longer possessed in this room. Dunmore sat to his left, a legal pad in front of him that he had not written anything on. Voss sat across from Dunmore, her attorney, who had arrived 12 minutes after the SUVs, apparently having been on standby, whispering something in her ear that she was not visibly responding to. Peterson sat near the door between 2 MPs, his body language that of a man who had only recently understood that he was not a witness in this room but a subject. Okafor sat along the side wall, his folder open, his USB drive connected to the federal server. The checkpoint program in Millhaven has been operational for 18 months, Marcus began. It was publicly presented as a traffic safety initiative targeting high-incident corridors. That is not what it was. The evidence will demonstrate what it actually was, who designed it, who funded its political protection, and what it was designed to accomplish. He nodded to Hargrove. The first display activated. A city map, Millhaven, in full, every street visible. And on it in red, the checkpoint locations, 11 of them spread across 18 months of operation. Every single one sat at the boundary between Eastwick and Crestwood Pines. Not at the highway interchange with the city's highest accident rate. Not at the intersection near the downtown bar district, where DUI incidents were documented in the department's own logs at 3 times the citywide average. Not anywhere else. Only there. Only at that line. Checkpoint placement, Marcus said. 11 locations, 18 months, 0 placements in any other corridor in the city. Whitmore uncrossed his arms, crossed them again. The second display, raw numbers, stop frequencies broken down by driver demographics, pulled directly from the department's own database by federal technicians who had accessed it 40 minutes ago under investigative authority. 91% of vehicles stopped black drivers. 96% of searches conducted black drivers. Among white drivers stopped in the same period 3 searches total. Among those 3, 0 arrests. Among black drivers stopped 247 searches, 94 arrests. Of those 94 arrests, 7 resulted in charges that were later reduced or dismissed entirely. Identical moving violations, Marcus continued. Documented in department records for the Crestwood Pines corridor. Number of checkpoints deployed in that corridor, 0. Number of stops initiated there on the basis of those violations, 0. Dunmore's legal pad remained blank. His pen had not moved. The third, display communications. Internal department emails, text messages between Dunmore and Whitmore, between Whitmore and Voss, between Voss and 3 names that Marcus had not yet introduced to the room. Dunmore's message to checkpoint officers dated 9 months ago, Eastwick plates, get the full protocol. Iltine W wants numbers this quarter. Don't send me clean runs. Whitmore's response to a complaint filed by an Eastwick resident routed through his office and marked resolved handled. File closed. The complaint had been filed 4 hours earlier and had never been investigated. Voss's message to Whitmore dated the same week the checkpoint ordinance was signed, program approved. Keep it clean on paper. D and his team know what we need. Marcus let the room sit with that for a moment. Then he said, the audio. From his watch transferred to the federal server during the 44 minutes before Hargrove's arrival. Dunmore's voice filled the room with the particular quality of a voice that does not know it is being recorded. You people from Eastwick have been a problem since the city approved the Crestwood expansion. The checkpoints are a courtesy, a warning. Most folks get it the first time. Nobody in the room moved. Nobody spoke. Voss's attorney had stopped whispering. Then the financial architecture. The third display shifted to Donor Records Development Company filings, City Council Advisory Board memberships, cross-referenced with campaign contribution histories. 3 Crestwood development firms had contributed a combined $340,000 to Whitmore's last 2 election campaigns. Voss sat on the advisory boards of 2 of those firms' positions that paid consulting fees, totaling $87,000 over the same 18-month period the checkpoint program had been operational. The development strategy was documented in an internal planning memo obtained from one of the firm's servers under federal subpoena, issued that afternoon, served digitally, legally unassailable. The memo used the phrase corridor normalization. It described a process by which sustained enforcement pressure in target residential zones would accelerate voluntary property liquidation and create acquisition opportunities at below-market valuation. Marcus read that sentence aloud. Then he read it again. Corridor normalization, he said. Sustained enforcement pressure. Voluntary property liquidation. He set the printed page on the table. This is the document that your checkpoint program was built to serve. Not public safety. Not traffic management. This. He reached into the folder Okafor had provided and placed a photograph at the center of the table. James Calloway, Sr. 79 years old. Sitting at his kitchen table on Clement Street, the lamp on behind him, his bruised wrist resting on the tablecloth. The fear in his eyes that Marcus had not seen there before and would spend years trying to put to rest. My father, Marcus said, retired school teacher, Eastwick resident for 51 years. He taught 4th grade in this city for 34 years. Some of you or your children sat in his classroom. The room was completely silent. 3 weeks ago, 2 of your officers went to his home on a wellness check he had not requested. They grabbed his wrist when he reached for his reading glasses. They left without filing a report or offering an explanation. Marcus looked at Whitmore. His complaint was filed the next morning. It was marked resolved 4 hours later without investigation. Whitmore looked at the photograph. For the first time all evening, he looked as though something had reached him. It did not last. But it was there. We have the documentation, Marcus said. We have the communications. We have the financial records. We have the audio. And we have 47 complaint forms from Eastwick residents. 47, each one marked resolved without a single investigative action taken. He looked around the table. The evidence speaks for itself. The federal prosecutors will now determine the specific charges. But before we proceed to that phase, I want every person in this room to understand something clearly. He picked up his father's photograph and held it up. This man has lived in his home for 51 years. He is not a corridor. He is not a target zone. He is not a liability to anyone's development timeline. He set the photograph down. He is a person. And so is every other resident of Eastwick whose name appears in these files. The printer near the door continued its quiet work. Page after page, time-stamped, sealed, unalterable. Outside, through the conference room window, the parking lot was still full of black vehicles that had arrived without sirens and would leave the same way, quietly, completely, and with everything they had come for. The arrests were not dramatic. That was the thing nobody who wasn't in the room would have expected, and the thing that Marcus, having spent 31 years watching power change hands in various configurations, found most accurate to his experience of how justice actually moves when it finally moves. No shouting, no overturned chairs, no moment of cinematic collapse. FBI agent Patricia Owens, who had arrived with Hargrove's second wave at 11:04 p.m., quiet and precise, carrying a leather document case, simply stood up from the side wall where she had been seated throughout the evidence presentation, walked to the head of the table, and placed a single sheet of paper in front of Sheriff Dale Whitmore. Sheriff Whitmore, this is a federal notice of investigation for civil rights conspiracy, abuse of authority, racially motivated enforcement policy, and obstruction of justice. You are not under formal arrest at this time. You are required to surrender your service weapon, your department credentials, and your personal devices. You may contact your attorney. You may not leave this building without federal authorization. Whitmore looked at the paper for a long time. His face had the color of old concrete. He reached slowly for his service weapon, placed it on the table. His credentials followed. His phone. His personal tablet. When he looked up, something in him had already receded, the elected official, the glad-handing campaign presence. The man who had believed for so long that the county's deference to him was a structural feature of the world rather than a circumstance subject to revision. All of it gone. What remained was just a man sitting at a table who had made decisions that were now going to define the rest of his life. Dunmore received his notice from a second agent without ceremony. He read it with the expression of someone reading a document in a language they understand perfectly and wish they did not. Peterson, when Agent Owens reached him near the door, looked up with an expression that contained for just a moment the remnant of the reflexive contempt that had been his default setting all evening. Then the moment passed, and what replaced it was something younger and more frightened. He was 29 years old. Marcus had known that from the badge record. 29, and the next several years of his life had just become a federal case file. Voss did not receive a notice. She received something different, a subpoena delivered by a Justice Department attorney who had arrived at 11:17 p.m. and who explained to her with the careful precision of someone who has had this conversation many times that her cooperation in the subsequent investigation would be noted, and that her non-cooperation would also be noted, and that both outcomes had different trajectories, and that she had approximately 48 hours to make a decision about which trajectory she preferred. Voss's attorney, who had spent the last hour progressively quieter, leaned in and said something in her ear. Voss stared at the subpoena for a moment. Then she nodded. Once. The nod of a person who has just accepted a reality they cannot change and has decided to try to manage what comes next. Marcus watched all of it from the side of the room. He did not move to the center. He did not speak during the processing. That was not his role in this phase, and he had no interest in performing triumph. He had performed nothing all evening. He was not going to start now. 1 week later, the congressional hearing room on Capitol Hill was full in the way that rooms are full when they contain something the public has decided it needs to see. Marcus sat at the witness table in full dress uniform. 4 stars. Service ribbons. The formal architecture of 31 years rendered in metal and cloth. He had worn this uniform in rooms with heads of state in forward operating bases, in field hospitals, and Pentagon briefings at 4 a.m. It had never felt more relevant than it did right now in a civilian hearing room, with the families of Eastwick residents seated in the public gallery behind him. Congressman Harold Tate called the session to order. General Calloway, thank you for your testimony. Please summarize the Pentagon's investigation into the Mill Haven checkpoint program. Marcus spoke for 40 minutes. He presented the evidence the same way he had presented it in the conference room, methodically, without dramatics, letting the numbers carry the weight they already possessed, without requiring amplification. The checkpoint map, the arrest demographics, the financial architecture, the 47 complaint forms, and his father's photograph, which he placed on the table in front of him and did not put away. A committee member leaned forward. General, why did the Pentagon deploy a 4-star general for a local policing matter? Marcus considered the question for a moment. Because the people of Eastwick are not a local matter, he said. Their constitutional rights are a national responsibility. And because some systems will only reveal what they are when someone walks through them directly. He paused. Most of the people who walked through this system did not have the option of calling the Pentagon afterward. That asymmetry is the problem we are here to address. The gallery was quiet in a way that was different from silence. It was the quiet of people who were paying attention with their whole bodies. Congressman Tate introduced the Eastwick Accountability Act at the close of the hearing. Federal standards for checkpoint operations, mandatory demographic data, collection, independent oversight with genuine authority, and criminal penalties for willful civil rights violations in enforcement programs. Outside the hearing room afterward, Okafor found Marcus in the corridor. Whitmore's bail hearing is Thursday, Okafor said. Dunmore's attorney is already talking to prosecutors. Peterson has requested a plea arrangement. Marcus nodded. And Voss, cooperating, full cooperation. She gave them everything on the development firms. The firms, 2 executives under federal indictment as of this morning. The Crestwood South project has been suspended pending investigation. The city has frozen all related development contracts. Marcus looked out the corridor window at the Capitol steps. A group of Eastwick residents had gathered outside. He had seen them in the gallery during the hearing, had recognized some faces he had known since childhood. Mrs. Loretta Briggs was among them in her Sunday coat, standing very straight. One more thing, Okafor said. He paused for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had shifted to something quieter and more personal. My transfer to Riverside District. It was formally rescinded this morning. I've been offered the lead position in the new federal local civil rights task force. I know, Marcus said. Okafor looked at him. You recommended me. You recommended yourself, Marcus said. 4 months ago at your kitchen table when you started documenting things that the system was designed to make invisible. I just made sure the right people were aware of it. Okafor was quiet for a moment. There's one more thing, he said. Your father is here. Marcus turned. At the end of the corridor, James Calloway Sr. stood with the careful uprightness of a man who has dressed formally for an occasion he understands to be important. Dark suit. The same tie he had worn to every school graduation ceremony for 34 years. His wrist, Marcus noticed, was no longer held at the careful angle of someone protecting a healing injury. The fear that had been in his eyes on Clement Street 3 weeks ago was gone. What was there instead was something Marcus recognized from his own earliest memories of his father, the particular quality of a man who knows who he is and where he stands in the world, and does not require anyone else's permission to occupy his own dignity. They walked toward each other in the Capitol corridor, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. They didn't need to. 6 months is not a long time. It is not long enough to undo 18 months of systematic harm or the years of accumulated fear that precede a program like the one Mill Haven built. It is not long enough to give back the jobs lost because of a wrongful arrest record, or the scholarship that lapsed while a case was pending, or the hours a 79-year-old man spent sitting alone with a bruised wrist and an unanswered phone. 6 months cannot carry that weight. But 6 months can begin. And beginning, Marcus had learned over 3 decades of watching institutions resist and then slowly change is not nothing. Beginning is everything. Sheriff Dale Whitmore was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison on 4 counts of civil rights conspiracy and 2 counts of obstruction of justice. He delivered no statement at sentencing. His attorney spoke briefly about mitigating factors. The judge listened, noted them in the record, and sentenced him as indicated. Lieutenant Craig Dunmore received 5 years, reduced from 7, through a cooperation agreement that required his full testimony in the civil proceedings against the Crestwood development firms. He gave that testimony in a conference room, not unlike the one in Millhaven Police Department, sitting across from federal prosecutors, speaking in the flat, careful voice of a man who has made his calculation and is living with it. Officer Kyle Peterson, 29 years old, badge permanently revoked, law enforcement career concluded, received 2 years, probation, mandatory civil rights training, and a record that would follow him through every background check for the rest of his professional life. His plea arrangement required a formal written apology to Marcus, to Mrs. Loretta Briggs, and to the 47 residents whose complaint forms had been marked resolved without investigation. Marcus read the apology when it arrived. It was 2 paragraphs. He read it once, set it down, and did not think about it further. Peterson's remorse or its absence was not the thing that mattered. The thing that mattered was the 47 names in the federal case file and what was being done for each of them. Sandra Voss avoided prison through her cooperation agreement. She resigned from the city council, forfeited her advisory board positions, and repaid $87,000 in consulting fees to a restitution fund. Her name appeared in the federal indictments against the 2 Crestwood development executives as an unindicted co-conspirator. She had moved by the time of sentencing to another city, another role, another version of the same life. Marcus had no particular feeling about this. Some accountability is incomplete. The work continues regardless. The restitution fund totaled $6.7 million. 312 cases were reviewed. 289 records were expunged. Scholarship applications were reopened. Employment records were corrected. The class action lawsuit, organized in part by Okafor's brother, a cardiologist who had his own checkpoint story that predated Marcus's by 8 months, moved forward through federal court with 304 plaintiffs. The checkpoint infrastructure was dismantled on a Thursday morning in March. Marcus was not there for it. He was at the Pentagon in a briefing about 3 other cities where the Millhaven model had identified similar patterns in development, adjacent enforcement programs. But Okafor was there, and Mrs. Loretta Briggs was there, and a number of Eastwick residents who had been getting up early for 18 months to navigate checkpoints on their way to work stood on the sidewalk and watched the concrete barriers come out. Mrs. Briggs, in her Sunday coat, filmed it on the same phone she had held in her pocket at the checkpoint on that Tuesday night. The video had 2.3 million views by the following Monday. 6 months after the hearing, Marcus returned to Eastwick on a Saturday. He came in civilian clothes in the same modest gray rental car, and he parked in front of his father's house on Clement Street and sat for a moment in the particular quiet of a neighborhood that has been through something and is slowly becoming itself again. The community center on Morrison Avenue had its lights on. Inside, the town hall meeting was already in progress. The new police chief, appointed by a reformed city council after Whitmore's arrest, presenting the department's new operational protocols to a room full of residents who had not yet decided whether to trust the institution, but had decided to show up and make it answer for itself. That Marcus thought was exactly correct. Trust is not given. It is built incrementally through accountability, through transparency, through showing up and making things answer. Okafor was there in his new capacity, with the federal task force facilitating. He had become, in the 6 months since Millhaven, the kind of person that institutions reluctantly discover. They cannot function without someone who knows where the bodies are buried. Not because he put them there, but because he spent 4 months at his kitchen table documenting exactly where they were. After the meeting, Marcus sat on the porch of his father's house. James Calloway Sr. brought 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him. The evening was warm. The street was quiet. Children rode bicycles on the sidewalk across the road, a thing that had not happened at this hour in this block for 18 months, not since the checkpoint lights had started appearing at the boundary with Crestwood Pines at dusk. "You didn't have to come yourself," his father said. "You could have sent people." "You're my father," Marcus said. James was quiet for a moment. "You went through all of that, the arrest, the cell, all of it, and you never told them who you were." "I told them exactly who I was," Marcus said. "A person, driving to a pharmacy. That should have been enough." His father looked at him for a long time. "It should have," he said. "It should have been enough for every single person they stopped." The street was quiet. A dog barked somewhere 2 blocks over. The oak tree in the front yard, the one the city had asked his father to remove 15 times, and that James Calloway Sr. had refused to cut down 15 times, moved gently in the evening air. Marcus drank his coffee. It was black, no sugar. The coffee shop on the corner had gotten the order right this time. Dignity does not require a uniform, a title, or 4 stars on a shoulder. It requires only the simple, unbreakable fact of being human, and the equally unbreakable insistence that the systems built to serve us must serve all of us equally, without exception, without condition. Marcus Calloway already knew who he was before he walked into that checkpoint. So did every person stopped before him. The tragedy was never that they didn't know their worth. The tragedy was that the system pretended it didn't. If this story stayed with you, drop your city and the time you're watching this in the comments. I want to know where in the world people still believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. And if you believe stories like this one matter, subscribe. There are more that need to be told.